There is a moment, most people cannot name exactly when it happened, where they quietly agreed to become smaller than they were built to be. Not because someone forced them, not because the door was locked, but because the distance between where they stood and where they needed to go looked too far, too steep, too uncertain. So they made peace with the gap. They called it being realistic. They called it patience. They called it waiting for the right time. But the right time was already moving without them. And while they were busy making peace with small, somewhere in a garage, in a dorm room, in a city nobody was watching, someone else was building the future. Not because they had more, not because they knew more, because they refused the agreement. This is the story of what happens when one mind decides the world it inherited is not the world it will accept. The first and most dangerous lie that gets fed to people early in life is this: that the world is fair. That if someone works hard, something good will happen. That if someone is kind, kindness returns. That if someone shows up, they will be seen. This lie is comfortable. It is warm. It gives people permission to move slowly, to hesitate, to wait. And while people are waiting on fairness, while they are waiting on the universe to balance the scales, the builders are already 3 years ahead. The builders understood something early. The world is not unfair either. The world is simply indifferent. It does not root for anyone. It does not punish or reward based on effort alone. It responds only to output, to results, to things that actually exist in reality, not in intention, not in potential, not in tomorrow. And here is where the first fundamental shift happens in the mind of someone who is going to build something remarkable. They stop negotiating with the world. They stop asking why it is hard. They stop looking for fairness. They stop comparing their chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. And they make a decision, a quiet, ferocious, non-negotiable decision, that the gap between where they are and where they need to be is going to be closed by their hands. Not by circumstance, not by opportunity falling from the sky, by work, by thinking, by execution, by showing up when it is inconvenient, when it is boring, when progress is invisible. The greats in any field, in technology, in business, in art, in science, they did not get there because they had more hours in the day. They got there because they chose to use those hours differently. Because while others were consuming, they were creating. While others were complaining, they were constructing. While others were explaining why it could not be done, they were already halfway through doing it. This is the operating system that separates builders from bystanders. And it starts not with action. It starts with a brutal, honest reckoning with reality. The question that every person who has ever built something meaningful had to answer at some point was not, "What do I want?" That question is too easy. Everyone wants things. Everyone has dreams. The real question, the one that separates the builders from the dreamers, is, what am I willing to endure to get there? Not what someone is excited about, not what sounds good at a dinner conversation, what they are willing to bleed for, what they are willing to look foolish for, what they are willing to stay up for when the rest of the world is asleep and comfortable and watching television. Because here is the truth that nobody puts in the motivational posters. The path to anything worth having is ugly. It is not cinematic. It is not a montage. It does not have a soundtrack. It is long stretches of repetition, doubt, setbacks that feel permanent, nights where the math does not add up and the timeline feels impossible, moments where quitting would not just be understandable, it would be reasonable. And the builders go through all of that. They go through all of that. And they keep going. Not because they are superhuman, not because they do not feel the weight, but because somewhere in their mind there is a lock on the exit door. They burned the bridge back to comfortable. They made the decision in advance, before the hard part arrived, that they were not going to stop. That decision, made early, made clearly, made with full understanding of what it costs, is the single most important competitive advantage a person can have. Most people think about success the wrong way. They think of it as a destination, a place they will arrive at eventually if they just keep moving. And because they think of it as a destination, they treat the journey as something to endure, a temporary suffering that ends when they finally get there. But the builders, the ones who actually change industries, who create things that matter, who build companies and movements and technologies that outlast them, they do not think of success as a destination. They think of it as a standard they hold themselves to every single day. A standard that is not tied to applause or achievement or recognition. A standard that exists entirely inside them and is enforced by no one but themselves. This is obsession, and obsession is misunderstood. People hear that word and they think imbalanced, unhealthy, extreme. But the builders know something different. Obsession is not a disorder, it is a strategy. It is the strategy of compounding attention. When someone is obsessed with a problem, they do not just work on it during work hours. They think about it on the way to work. They think about it in the shower. They see connections that others miss because their mind is always partially in that space. They accumulate insight not just through deliberate effort, but through constant background processing. A person who works 8 focused hours with true obsession does not produce 8 hours of output. They produce something that reflects hundreds of hours of accumulated subconscious thinking, because the mind never fully clocked out. This is why the obsessed seem to move faster than everyone else. It is not that they have more time, it is that their time is denser, more compressed. Every hour of deliberate work is backed by 1,000 hours of background thought. The people who stay, who do not click away when the truth starts to feel uncomfortable, those are the ones who are actually ready to change something, the ones who stick around for the full picture. This is a place built for those people. Subscribe to Cabbage Directive, but obsession without direction is just noise, and this is where the great builders separate themselves from the merely passionate. They are not just obsessed with working, they are obsessed with understanding. There is a critical difference. The merely passionate work hard at executing what they already know. They grind on the familiar. They optimize the obvious. The truly obsessed ask deeper questions. They want to understand why things work, not just that they work. They want to see the mechanisms underneath, the first principles, the rules that govern the system, so they can know which rules are actually ironclad and which ones are just conventions waiting to be broken. This kind of thinking, first principles thinking, is not a philosophical luxury. It is a practical superpower. When someone understands a system at its root, They see paths that others literally cannot perceive. They are not constrained by how things have always been done, because they have gone deeper than convention. They are operating at the level of why, and from that level, entirely new hows become visible. This is how industries get disrupted, not by people who worked harder within the existing model, but by people who went deep enough to see the model itself, and then had the audacity to build a different one. There is a law that governs almost everything in the world of building and creating, and it is ruthlessly simple. Time multiplied by quality of focus equals compound results, not linear results. Compound results. This is the most important concept that anyone trying to build something should internalize, and it is also the most consistently misunderstood. People dramatically overestimate what they can do in 1 month, and they dramatically, catastrophically underestimate what they can do in 5 years of sustained, focused, intentional effort. The mistake is in the timeline. When someone starts something new, a skill, a business, a creative practice, the early period feels disproportionately brutal. The effort going in seems massively greater than what is coming out. The progress feels invisible. The gap between their output and the output of people further ahead seems enormous. And this is exactly where most people quit. They quit not because they were incapable, not because the goal was impossible. They quit because they did not understand the shape of the curve. The compounding curve is not a straight line. It is nearly flat at the beginning. It is humbling in the early stages. It demands enormous input for what feels like minimal return. And then, somewhere around the point where most people have already walked away, it begins to bend. It begins to accelerate. And the same amount of effort that was producing almost nothing starts producing extraordinary results, because it is no longer working from zero. It is working from a base, a foundation of accumulated skill, accumulated relationships, accumulated reputation, accumulated systems. The builders who understood this did not wait for the curve to feel rewarding before committing. They committed fully, knowing that the early period was going to feel thankless, and they decided in advance that thankless was acceptable. That is how someone earns the curve. Now, what compounds? Not just effort, not just hours. Skill compounds. Every hour spent getting genuinely better at something that matters, not just going through the motions but actually pushing against the edge of current capability. That hour does not just add to a running total. It multiplies. Because skill creates leverage, and leverage changes everything. A person with elite skill does not compete on the same playing field as everyone else. They are not just better, they are operating in a different economy. Their time is worth more. Their decisions are worth more. Their judgment is worth more. The same 40-hour week produces different outcomes depending on the skill level of the person deploying it. This is why the builders are obsessive about craft. Not because they enjoy being perfectionists, but because they understand that skill is one of the few assets that cannot be taken away, and that grows in direct proportion to the seriousness of the effort. But skill alone is not enough. Here is a truth that is uncomfortable for people who pride themselves on pure ability. In the real world, skill without systems eventually hits a ceiling, because there is a limit to how much any individual can produce through personal effort alone. There is a limit to how many hours can be worked, how many decisions can be made, how many tasks can be executed in a day. The builders who scale, who go beyond personal productivity into genuine leverage, are the ones who build systems that work independent of their constant attention. A system is a process that produces output without requiring the same input every single time. It is a machine. It could be a business process, a team structure, a technology infrastructure, a content engine, a distribution network. When someone builds a system, they are not just producing output, they are building a factory that produces output, and the factory runs whether or not they are personally operating every machine. This is the leap from successful individual to builder of something larger than themselves. And it requires a fundamental shift in thinking from how do I do this to how do I build something that does this. There's a conversation happening constantly in the minds of people who want to build something, and it sounds like this. Not yet. I'm not ready yet. I need more experience, more capital, more certainty, more time. And this conversation continues for months, sometimes years, and while it continues, while the waiting happens, the window shifts, the market moves. Someone else ships the product, someone else writes the book, someone else launches the company, someone else takes the risk that was being endlessly prepared for. And the person who is waiting is left holding a plan for something that no longer has the same opening. The builders understood something about risk that most people have backwards. Not acting is also a risk. This sounds obvious when stated plainly, but in practice, the brain does not process inaction as risk. It processes inaction as safety, as caution, as wisdom. But staying in place, in a world that is moving, is not neutral. It is falling behind. Every month spent in preparation mode rather than execution mode is a month of compounding mist. This does not mean recklessness. The builders are not gamblers. They do not take risk randomly or blindly. They take calculated risk that is informed by deep understanding, by preparation, by a clear view of the downside, and a strong belief in the upside. But they act, they ship, they launch, they commit. Because they understand that the cost of being wrong is usually survivable. The cost of never trying is permanent. There is a particular kind of courage that does not get talked about enough in conversations about success. The courage to be wrong publicly. This is one of the real barriers. Not lack of skill, not lack of capital. The terror of being seen to try and fail. The fear of the judgment that comes with a visible attempt. And this fear is not irrational. There is judgment. There are people who will watch and observe and note when something does not work and quietly feel better about their own inaction because someone else tried and stumbled. But here is the mathematics of that situation. The judgment of those people is worth exactly nothing. It does not pay rent, it does not build companies, it does not create technology or art or systems that matter. The people watching from the sidelines waiting for others to fail so they can feel validated in their own non-participation. They are not the audience that matters. The builders learn to identify their actual audience, the people who will benefit from what gets built, the customers, the users, the community, the collaborators. Those people are not rooting for failure. They are waiting for solutions. Every generation has a defining technological wave, a shift so fundamental that it restructures what is possible and what is possible for whom. The builders who thrive are the ones who identify these waves early, not when everyone is talking about them, not when the media has written 10,000 articles, not when the stock price has already moved. Early, when it still looks strange, when it still requires explanation, when it is still possible to build on top of it rather than just observe it. Because the early period of any transformational technology is where the builders have the most leverage. The landscape is still being defined. The rules are not yet written. The incumbents are still dismissing it. The infrastructure is being laid, and the people laying it, and the people building on top of it, are the ones who will define what the next decade looks like. Right now, in this specific moment in history, there are technological waves happening that make the dot-com era look like a warm-up act. Artificial intelligence is not a product. It is not a feature. It is a new layer of infrastructure for the entire world. It is a general-purpose technology, like electricity, like the internet, that does not just improve specific tasks. It restructures entire industries. It changes the economics of creation, of labor, of problem-solving. And the people who understand this early, who do not wait for consensus, who do not wait for the obvious use cases, but who go deep into the mechanics and the possibilities, those are the people who will have unimaginable leverage in the years ahead. The acceleration of computing power, the exponential growth in what machines can process, simulate, and generate, is not slowing down. If anything, the structural changes now happening in chip design, in parallel computing, in the architecture of intelligence itself, are accelerating the acceleration. This creates an environment that is profoundly hostile to complacency and profoundly generous to ambition. For the builder who is paying attention, who is building relevant skills, who is thinking about where this wave is going rather than where it has been, the opportunity surface area has never been larger in human history. But for the person who is not paying attention, who is waiting for someone else to figure out what it means, who is hoping to catch the wave after it has already crested, the disruption that is coming will be difficult, because this technological shift is not going to leave most industries unchanged. It is going to restructure them. This is not said to create fear. It is said to create urgency, because there is an enormous difference between being disrupted by a technological shift and being carried by it. The difference is entirely in the preparation, in the intention, in the decision to understand what is happening and build with it rather than against it. The builders do not fear the wave. They learn to surf. This is something that the world of inspirational content does not always acknowledge, but it is absolutely true, and pretending otherwise is a disservice. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings fluctuate. Motivation is high on Monday morning after watching something inspiring. It is significantly lower on Thursday afternoon when the task is tedious and the results are still distant and the couch is right there. The builders did not build their results on motivation. They built them on systems, on structure, on decisions made in advance, in cold blood, with full knowledge that the moment of execution would not always feel aligned with the goal. This is the concept of architecture, designing the environment, the schedule, the commitments, the habits, in such a way that the right behavior happens even when the motivation is absent. The builder who writes 1,000 words every morning before checking their phone is not always motivated to do that. But the architecture makes it happen anyway. The athlete who trains at 6 in the morning is not always feeling the call, but the structure, the alarm set the night before, The gym clothes already laid out, the agreement made with the training partner, removes the decision from the moment of low motivation. They do not rely on feeling ready. They build a life that acts regardless of how it feels. Let's go granular. Because vague advice about building habits is not useful. What the builders actually do, what the serious operating system looks like in practice, is specific. The morning is not casual. The first hours of the day are the most cognitively fresh. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex thinking, decision-making, and creative problem-solving, is most active early before the noise of the day accumulates. The serious builder knows this and defends those hours like territory. No news in the first hour, no social media, no inbox. Those things are designed to pull attention outward, toward what other people are doing, what other people need, what other people want to say. The builder's first hours go inward, toward the most important problem on the table, the most critical work of the day. The work is tiered. Not all work is created equal. There is deep work, the focused, cognitively intensive work that actually moves the needle. And there is shallow work, the administrative, reactive, logistical activity that feels productive but does not actually create forward momentum. The builders are disciplined about separating these. Deep work gets the best hours, the early morning, the protected blocks. Shallow work, the emails, the meetings, the organizational tasks, gets the remaining time. Most people invert this accidentally. They spend their sharpest hours in reactive mode, responding, reacting, attending, and save their most important creative and strategic work for the exhausted end of the day. And then they wonder why progress feels slow. The reflection is non-negotiable. At the end of each day, the builders stop. They review. They ask, what happened today? What worked? What did not? What needs to be different tomorrow? Reflection converts experience into learning, and learning, rapidly, consistently, honestly, is one of the most durable competitive advantages any builder can possess. There is a story that gets told about the greats, and it is told in a way that makes the failure look clean, almost romantic. The narrative arc: they struggled, then they succeeded. The darkness before the dawn. But the reality was messier than that. Far messier. The reality was failure that did not feel like a step on the journey. Failure that felt like the end of the journey. Failure that felt personal and humiliating and final. Not the cinematic kind of failure that gets cleaned up in a montage, the grinding, prolonged kind. The kind where momentum reversed, where resources depleted, where people who believed in the vision stopped believing. The builders went through that. Most of them went through versions of it multiple times. And the question worth examining is not whether they suffered. They did. The question is, what happened inside during that period that allowed them to continue? The answer, consistent across virtually every major builder's story, is a particular kind of cognitive flexibility, the ability to separate identity from outcome. When a project fails, when a company stumbles, when a product flops, when a strategy collapses, the person who has tied their entire identity to that outcome experiences it as a personal destruction, as evidence of their inadequacy, as proof that they are not enough. A failure does not mean the builder is broken. It means the current approach did not work. Those are fundamentally different sentences. And the difference between them is the difference between someone who rebuilds and someone who retreats. There is also a dimension of failure that rarely gets discussed: the information density of failure. A success teaches something, but it often teaches it incompletely, because when things work, it is not always clear which variables actually caused the success. Was it the product, the timing, the team, the market? Success can obscure the mechanism. Failure is different. Failure is specific. It points directly at what did not work. It highlights the assumptions that were wrong, the variables that were underestimated, the systems that were inadequate. Failure is expensive tuition, but the curriculum is precise. The builders who failed and came back stronger were not just more determined. They were more informed. They took the specific lessons of the specific failure, the exact mechanism that broke, the exact assumption that was wrong, and they used that information to build the next version with far fewer blind spots. There is a common misunderstanding about how wealth actually accumulates for builders, and it shapes the decisions of millions of people in the wrong direction. The misunderstanding is this: that wealth is the goal you aim at directly. But almost universally, the people who build significant wealth did not start by focusing on the money. They started by focusing on a problem, on a gap in the world that needed filling, on a capability they wanted to build, on something they were genuinely, sometimes irrationally interested in. Regardless of what the financial return would look like, the money followed. It followed because genuine focus on a problem, on actually solving it, on actually building something that serves people, creates value. And created value, when properly organized and distributed, eventually converts to financial reward. The person who starts with "how do I make money" is solving the wrong equation. They are optimizing for extraction rather than creation, and markets, over time, are exceptionally good at rewarding creation and penalizing pure extraction. The better question, the question the builders asked, was, what problem is worth solving? When that question gets answered honestly and pursued relentlessly, the financial architecture tends to follow. But this is not idealism. This needs to be practical. Understanding the mechanics of how value converts to wealth is critical, because many people build things that are genuinely valuable and yet fail to capture that value financially, not because they were not talented, but because they did not understand the business architecture around the value they created. Value creation is necessary but not sufficient. Value capture, the design of the business model, the ownership structure, the pricing, the distribution, the protection of what has been built, that is the part that actually moves wealth from concept to reality. The builders were students of both dimensions. They understood their craft deeply, but they also understood the business of their craft. They understood unit economics. They understood leverage points. They understood how to price for value rather than cost. They understood the difference between an asset and a job, and they systematically built the former rather than being trapped in the latter. An asset generates returns independent of ongoing personal effort. A job requires continuous presence to continue paying. Almost everything in life can be structured as either one, and the default, without intentional design, is almost always the job. The builders designed for the asset. They thought about ownership. They thought about what would continue to work for them while they slept. One of the most counterintuitive lessons from the study of high-performing builders is this: Their success was defined at least as much by what they did not do as by what they did. The world is full of options. In the modern era particularly, the volume of available opportunities, projects, partnerships, platforms, paths, is overwhelming. The inbox is full. The notifications are constant. The offers are real. The opportunities are genuinely interesting. And the ability to say no to almost all of them, clearly, decisively, without extended deliberation, is one of the most valuable operational skills a builder can develop. Every yes has a hidden cost. When attention goes toward one thing, it is taken from something else. This is not metaphorical. It is literal. The brain has finite processing capacity. Time has finite hours. Energy has finite supply. When a builder spreads their attention across 10 initiatives, even 10 good initiatives, each one gets a tenth of the available focus. And a tenth of focused attention is rarely enough to produce anything extraordinary. It is enough to maintain. It is enough to progress incrementally. It is not enough to compete at the highest level in any of them. The builders who produced extraordinary results in specific domains did so by making a choice that most people resist. They narrowed. They said no to the adjacent opportunity. They said no to the interesting distraction. They said no to the request that was flattering but not aligned. They bet their energy on a small number of things, sometimes one thing, and went all the way into it. This is the discipline of no, and it requires a clear understanding of what is actually important, not what is urgent, not what is flattering, not what is easy, but what actually moves the critical mission forward. Sacrifice is a word that people use around success, but it is often misunderstood as suffering, as deprivation. The builders did not generally experience their sacrifices as suffering. They experienced them as selection, as the natural result of having decided that something mattered more. The social event traded for the working session, the comfortable job traded for the uncertain venture. The short-term financial security traded for the long-term ownership, the approval of people who do not understand the vision traded for the progress of people who do. These are trades, not sacrifices, and the builders who framed them that way, rather than as painful deprivations, moved through them with far less resistance. Same hours, different frame. Completely different psychological experience. There is a version of the independent builder myth that is seductive but false. The lone genius operating in isolation, achieving through pure personal force of will. This story is not accurate for almost any builder who has actually created something significant. The reality is that every major achievement, every company, every product, every movement was a collaborative project, even when one name became associated with it. Behind every visible leader were dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people whose intelligence, skill, commitment, and faith made the vision real. The builders understood this, and they thought carefully about the people around them, not as employees or contacts or tools, but as amplifiers, as the people whose presence and effort would either multiply or diminish what was possible. This is why the selection of collaborators, of team members, of partners, of mentors, of the inner circle, is one of the most consequential decisions a builder makes, because the quality of the people a builder surrounds themselves with does not just affect output. It affects thinking, it affects standards, it affects what seems possible, It affects the internal baseline of ambition. The person surrounded by extraordinary people starts to view extraordinary as normal. This is why the greatest builders obsess about talent. Not just their own, but the talent they attract, develop, and retain. Because a team of genuinely excellent people who believe in the mission is not just additive, it is exponential. But the network that matters is not just the formal one, not just the team, the investors, the partners. The reputation is the network. Reputation is the distributed, decentralized record of how someone has operated, in public and in private. What they built, how they treated people, whether their word was reliable, whether their vision was coherent, whether they showed up when it was hard, and reputation compounds. In the early days, it is built slowly. Every interaction, every decision, every output contributes, often invisibly. But over time, reputation becomes the infrastructure through which opportunities flow. The reason certain people get called when there is something important happening. The reason certain people get the benefit of the doubt in a new room. The builders invested in reputation not strategically in a calculated way, but by simply operating with integrity at every level, by doing what they said they would do, by building things that worked, by being honest about what they did not know, by treating people at all levels, with consistent respect. This is simple. It is not easy, but it is simple. And the compounding on that investment over years and decades is extraordinary. The long game and why most people cannot play it. There is a particular kind of strategic thinking that separates the builders who create lasting things from those who create successful things that eventually fade. The ability to think in decades, not quarters. Most of the incentive structures in modern life push toward short-term optimization, quarterly earnings, monthly metrics, weekly content performance, daily engagement numbers. And these measurements are not useless. They provide signal. They indicate whether what is happening is working in the immediate term. But when the short-term metrics become the goal rather than an indicator, something critical gets lost. The long-term architecture. The company that optimizes purely for quarterly growth may make decisions that hollow out the long-term foundation. The creator who chases the algorithm may build an audience but sacrifice the deeper craft that would have produced something enduring. The entrepreneur who focuses entirely on exit may build a business that looks good from the outside but lacks the internal depth to survive serious challenges. The builders who created things that lasted, who built institutions rather than moments, were willing to accept short-term friction for long-term compound gain. They invested in infrastructure before it was necessary. They built culture before it was urgent. They developed people before the roles existed. They worked on platforms and capabilities that would not pay off for years, because they could see clearly that they would pay off eventually and at a scale that made the wait entirely rational. This long-game thinking also shapes how the great builders approach personal development. They are not trying to be the best version of themselves in the next 6 months. They are building the person who will be ready for an opportunity that does not yet exist, in a world that does not yet look the way it will look. This requires a particular kind of intellectual humility and openness. The ability to recognize that what they know today is incomplete, that the mental models that served them at the current level may not serve them at the next level. That growth requires the discomfort of unlearning as much as it requires the effort of learning. The great builders read voraciously, not just in their field, across fields. They import frameworks from biology into business, from physics into strategy, from history into technology. They are constantly expanding the map, not just moving faster on the current map. Growth requires ongoing reinvention, not abandonment of what worked, but evolution of it. The willingness to break what is working before someone else breaks it for them. We are living in an extraordinary moment. Not comfortable, not easy. Extraordinary. The world is in the middle of a fundamental restructuring. Technologies that seemed distant 5 years ago are mainstream. Industries that seemed permanent are under pressure. Jobs that seemed secure are being redefined. The relationship between human skill and machine capability is shifting in ways that have not been fully processed yet by individuals, by institutions, or by economies. In the middle of restructuring, there are always two groups. The group that looks at disruption and sees danger, and the group that looks at the same disruption and sees surface area. The builders always find their way into the second group, not because they are naive about the risks, not because they do not see the disruption clearly, but because they have a different relationship with uncertainty than most people. They have practiced operating in it. They have learned, through their own work and through exposure to others who built, that uncertainty is not the enemy of opportunity. Uncertainty is opportunity. Because when things are uncertain, the playing field is not fully defined. And when the playing field is not fully defined, someone with deep knowledge, strong execution, and genuine ambition can claim a position that would have been inaccessible in a settled, predictable landscape. The window is open. It does not stay open forever. Now comes the part where the truth gets personal. Everything described in this conversation is actionable, not theoretical, not reserved for the extraordinarily talented or the generationally privileged. These are principles. They are operational. They can be applied, starting today, at whatever level someone is currently at. But they require something. They require an honest decision, not a motivated decision, not a feeling, not an "I'll start on Monday." An honest decision made with full knowledge of what it actually costs, what it will actually require, what will need to be given up. Because the truth is that most people will not do this. Most people will listen, will feel something, will nod at the right moments, and will return to the same patterns tomorrow. Not because they are bad people, not because they lack potential, but because the pull of comfort is strong, and the path described here is not comfortable. The early period of building is hard. The middle period is harder. The moments of doubt are real. The sacrifice is real. The nights when the math does not add up and the goal feels impossibly far, those are real. But so is the compound curve. So is the asset that keeps producing. So is the reputation that opens doors. So is the skill that cannot be taken away. So is the life, the actual, specific, extraordinary life, on the other side of the decision to build seriously. These things are also real. The people who made the decision, who woke up one day and said, with full sincerity and full understanding of the cost, that they were going to build something that mattered, those people exist. They are not mythological. They are not supermen. They were, at some point, at the beginning. Uncertain, unproven. looking at the gap between where they were and where they needed to be and feeling the weight of it. And they went anyway. That is the whole story. Not talent, not luck, not being in the right place at the right time. Though timing matters and they learn to read it, the decision, and then the relentless, day after day, year after year execution on that decision. The people still here, who went through the whole conversation, who did not skip to the end, who sat with the uncomfortable truths and let them land. Those are the people who are genuinely serious, not just about watching this, about building something. Those people, the ones who are building or committed to starting, this is where they belong. This is built for them. So subscribe to Ingenuity Inspiration. The world does not need more people who know what to do. It has those in abundance. The internet is full of people who understand the principles, who can articulate the strategy, who can explain the framework. What the world actually needs, what is genuinely scarce, what is genuinely valuable, what the market rewards at the highest level, is people who execute. People who close the gap between knowing and doing. People who take the uncomfortable step from understanding a concept to actually deploying it in the real world, with real stakes, with real outcomes. That gap between understanding and doing is where most potential goes to die. And crossing it is not a matter of intelligence. It is a matter of decision, of commitment, of the willingness to be imperfect in motion rather than perfect in place. The builder who ships the flawed product is ahead of the perfectionist who never ships. The builder who starts the company before they feel ready is ahead of the planner who is still optimizing the business plan. The builder who makes the investment before they are certain is ahead of the analyst who waits for certainty that never comes. Action in the direction of the goal, consistently over time, compounds. That is the entire formula. Start now. Start imperfect. Start without the full picture. Start without permission, without guarantee, without the blessing of people who cannot see what is being built. Because the future, the actual specific future, belongs to the people who build it, not the people who comment on it. Not the people who analyze it, not the people who have strong opinions about how it should be done by someone else. The builders, the ones who sit down and do the work, the ones who show up on the Tuesday morning when there is no motivation, the ones who stayed in the room when quitting was the easier choice, the ones who had a vision and held on to it through the periods when nothing seemed to be working. Those people are not finished. They are just getting started. And every single morning, the gap between who they are and who they need to be gets a little smaller because they showed up one more time, did the work one more time, compounded the investment one more time. That is the only edge that matters. That is the whole game. Go build something.